Thank you for inviting me to join you today. I'm going to address litigation and advocacy efforts to lift medically unjustified restrictions on mifepristone, a drug used for early medication abortion and miscarriage care. In the past 21 years, more than 4 million people in the United States alone have used mifepristone, and medication abortion now comprises 60% of US abortions in the first 10 weeks of pregnancy. In the FDA-approved medication abortion regimen, mifepristone blocks a hormone necessary to sustain pregnancy, and a second drug called misoprostol, which is taken 24 to 48 hours later, causes uterine contractions to evacuate the uterus in a process that's very similar to an early miscarriage. FDA acknowledges that mifepristone's safety and efficacy are well established by research and experience, and that complications from the drug are exceedingly rare. Nevertheless, the agency imposes what's called a risk evaluation and mitigation strategy, or a REMS, that severely restricts where, how, and from whom this medication can be obtained. Most notably, among these restrictions is a requirement that mifepristone can only be dispensed in person at a hospital, clinic, or medical office. No treatment has to happen at that time. It's just a requirement that the patient pick up the pill in person at a healthcare facility that stocks and dispenses the drug, even though they can receive all necessary evaluation and counseling by telemedicine and are permitted to self-administer the mifepristone tablet unsupervised at a location of their choice. All of that is to say that there's no medical justification for the requirement. It is nothing more than a barrier to access. Of the more than 20,000 FDA-approved drugs, mifepristone is the only one FDA requires patients to pick up in a clinical setting, even though they don't have to take it under clinical supervision. On behalf of leading medical organizations, individual physicians, and reproductive justice advocates, the American Civil Liberties has taken the FDA to court twice because the agency's restrictions on mifepristone violate federal statutory and constitutional law. We filed the first suit in 2017, asking the federal court to permanently block the REMS. That case was proceeding to judgment when, in January of 2020, the court put the case on hold pending the outcome of a Supreme Court case where the decision was expected in the summer of 2020. But there was a drumbeat of requests to the FDA from the medical community that intensified in the spring of 2020 as the pandemic set in and the in-person REMS requirements put patients and their families at risk of exposure to a deadly virus as they had to travel needlessly in person to a healthcare facility for the sole purpose of picking up a pill that they could put in their pocket and take home with them and take later. FDA refused to relax enforcement of the mifepristone REMS during the pandemic, even as the government implemented extensive measures to limit in-person contact in other circumstances and to encourage the use of telemedicine whenever possible, including for the provision of drugs such as opioids that carry far greater risk than mifepristone. So we filed a second lawsuit, this time COVID-related, asking a federal court on an emergency basis to block the FDA's enforcement of the in-person dispensing requirements for the duration of the federal public health emergency. This suit highlighted the particularly harsh impact of the REMS on people living with low incomes and people of color, the very people most severely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic from both a health and economic perspective. We won in the district court, but the Trump administration went all the way to the US Supreme Court twice over a period of 6 months to try to reinstate the mifepristone REMS in-person requirements. And they were ultimately successful in January of 2021 after Justice Barrett joined the court. But for 6 months, clinicians were able to offer care to eligible patients by telemedicine and deliver the medication to them by mail or delivery. Patients in rural areas who lived hours from the nearest abortion provider, and those in metropolitan areas who would have had to take public transportation, find childcare, take time away from much needed jobs, all the while facing the risk of exposure to a deadly virus as they traveled, were able to access abortion without leaving their homes. In addition, this injunction created enormous opportunity for innovation for the provision of medication abortion via telehealth in states that do not restrict such access. And critically, researchers were able to collect and publish data demonstrating the safety and efficacy of medication abortion without the mifepristone in-person REMS. The drumbeat from scientists, advocates, and public health officials urging FDA to listen to the science and lift the REMS never let up. And the Biden administration was facing litigation deadlines and the need to attempt to justify these REMS in multiple federal courts. In the face of overwhelming science, FDA announced this spring that it would cease enforcing the mifepristone in-person requirements for the duration of the public health emergency. The agency also announced that it had undertaken a comprehensive review of the mifepristone REMS. Leading scientific organizations have submitted extensive research. Medical journals have issued special publications focusing exclusively on this issue, and the plaintiffs in our litigation submitted extensive evidence from the lawsuit demonstrating that these requirements are not medically necessary and that they burden access in dangerous ways. Our litigation is now on hold until December 1st, with the hope that FDA will complete its review by the end of this year and will remove the mifepristone REMS completely, providing patients with broad access to the medication they need for early medication abortion and miscarriage care. Thank you again for having me with you today.